in the evening, joined here by Brian Reddy. Brendan is traveling and got some work stuff, so just going to be a duo this evening for this latest episode of the Friarcast. It's been a minute since we were here. I think it's a combination of people being sick, traveling, work, and melancholy. I would say it's probably a mix of all those things. Since our last episode, I think I'm trying to remember if we did one after St. John's or I don't even know now. Maybe we did, maybe we didn't. I remember talking Creighton and St. John's, so maybe we did one. But either way, Providence 12-15 on the season, 6-10 in the league. Currently projected to most likely play in the 8-9 game in the Big East tournament in a couple weeks. I guess we're almost there. 4 games remaining on the schedule, including tomorrow night against Marquette in Milwaukee. Then they're home against UConn, home against DePaul, and they finish on the road at Xavier, which is a game that just got the tip time announced for 4 p.m. Eastern on FS1 to finish the season. Providence had their second 4-game losing streak of the season, with the other one coming St. Bonaventure, St. John's, Marquette, UConn back in mid-December into early January. They did snap that with a win against Villanova at home, which was one of the best games they played in a while overall, like maybe even the last couple of years. Go back into maybe 2022 for a start to finish shooting performance like that. I think 13-27 from 3, if I'm right about that.
Yes.
So, they had 16 against Butler too, which that's a whole nother story. But and then obviously the game down in DC, Cooley finally gets one. At least it wasn't at home. That's how I look at it. And the season is lost at this point, regardless of any other outcomes. So, we're not going to do a whole big production of reviewing every minutia detail of these last few games or previewing all the games to come, the 4 regular season games left. But we are going to do a lot of portal talk. We're going to do some kind of philosophizing about the program in general, college basketball in general, the portal in general, some of the things that could be coming down the pike in the next 6 weeks or so with this house settlement potentially happening in April, and what that could mean which is, towards the end of the portal season. So unclear how any of this will actually work, but we'll get into some of that at the end. But just, Brian, I don't know, maybe on the last week or two of games here, I tend to think that, once the non-conference went the way it did, and then kind of late December with this Marquette ridiculously horrible effort at home where they got smoked 78-50 December 31st, and we kind of turned the calendar and turned the page, and a lot of our stat quoting on this show has been since January 1st, largely because the team has been playing very different, and I think that's sort of a commentary on the fact that was right around the time that it was pretty clear that Bryce Hopkins was going to be shut down for the season and not return. So I think it made sense to judge them because they were stylistically and roster-wise very different going forward. But they've had guys in and out of the lineup the last couple of weeks, kind of important players. Jabri obviously having that huge game at St. John's, and then immediately, being out for the year with a meniscus tear. And, so there's just been, and, Corey Floyd's missed some games here, Cardette with some missed games. Really the only guys who haven't missed games are Pierre and Bensley Joseph, and I guess Oswin, although he has had his issues with illness and a lot of foul trouble, creased in and out of the lineup, so dealing with injuries and illness. So it's been very hard to get a feel for this team in general. But it's been interesting to see, but curious for your thoughts on maybe the last week or two of these outings here.
It's funny. I try to be positive at all times, and I'll freely admit it's been difficult the last couple of weeks. Just the fact that every game in this league, you see, we could win or lose almost against everybody. St. John's is going to clinch the first place this year, and we lost 2 games to them, both on shots in the final seconds. We can be competitive. But, then in the last 3 games, Kim's teams have given up 90 points in regulation 3 times since he's been here, and 2 of them are the last 3 games. And Xavier didn't play great to do it, and Georgetown was missing their either first or second best player and did it against us. That was kind of it was tough to watch, to be honest with you, especially sandwiched, like you said, in between the Villanova game, which was a very good game on all counts. I do think a lot of that has been that they've taken so many hits, especially with players who are good defenders like Corey Wesley that was playing good earlier in the year, and that they've had to replace them. It's really kind of, like I said, taken a lot of the positivity and enthusiasm off the season. And for somebody like me who doesn't watch the NBA, doesn't watch the NFL, doesn't watch the NHL, it's kind of tough because you go from the next month till November. And even with college football, I mean, they have the spring football, they have the practices, they get lots of coverage for that. They have the spring game, so it kind of breaks it up, makes it a little easier to go through. I mean, we're basically not going to see anything now for the next 6 months other than the portal. And this is probably going to be the most important offseason for the Friars in recent memory. Most years, they've kind of had the team put together. They've been adding a couple of pieces. We thought that's what we were doing this year, but, with Bryce not being able to make the comeback, it made the portal much more important. And I think next year going forward, it's going to be, somewhat of a make or break situation for the Friars with the portal. But before that, we've got 2 games this week. I think Marquette's a tough matchup for us. Connecticut's a team we can beat. Who knows which team will show up? And then with the last 2 games, it's kind of the same thing. So, by the time we get to the Big East tournament, I'll have it in my head a way that we're going to win 4 straight and get an NCAA automatic bid. But for now, I think my focus right now has been looking at the portal, looking at the players out there. And I think it's going to be a very intriguing month from mid-March till mid-April when the portal closed to see who's in there, both from the Friars and from other teams, and see what's available.
Yeah, and you mentioned, the portal does open officially 1 month from today, March 24th. This year, uniquely and new is that the portal is only open for 30 days, although that feels like it's only as good until the first lawsuit that comes on April 23rd, April 24th, whatever, for some kid who, whatever. And obviously there's exceptions to that with coaches. If some coaching movement can reopen the portal for guys or extend time for guys who are impacted by their coach leaving. So, some of it is a little fluid, but technically speaking, it's open for 30 days starting in a month. And last year, I think we all felt pretty good about the fact that Kim and staff had kind of identified the guys they wanted and locked them up pretty quickly. And talking to some people the last couple of weeks who had some good perspective on things and I think make a lot of sense. I think it's worth kind of talking about here is that, maybe some of that brevity to get things done was rush a little bit, and maybe they won't be as fast this time because they're going to be a little bit more thoughtful and take a little time to try to develop some relationships a little bit more, which is hard to do in this era of portal stuff, especially if maybe you didn't necessarily recruit someone out of high school. Like there's one thing if you have familiarity with somebody and you miss them out of high school and then you get them second time around, but that doesn't seem to happen all that often really in the portal because it's so driven by money and fit and roles and guys who want to move up a level and they want to start and they want, sometimes it just can be a very different priority matching for what's going to be a fit for certain guys. So, there's sort of an archetype, but I think one interesting thing to talk about generically is, we follow the portal pretty closely. You're the chairman of the very official portal committee in the Discord, and there's a list of guys, and a lot of them are some of them are very specific, like you love those guys, but some of them are, it's like them or someone like them is sort of the idea, and I think one of the things that's challenging for us as we think through it and talk about in Discord a lot, which is basically every day at this point now. The portal is basically the main topic of conversation. Is it's just so hard to know who's going to be back next year and what that means for targeting guys in the portal. So, just as an example, obviously the Bryce Hopkins thing, that's everyone is aware that that's a big, Kim mentioned a couple of weeks ago or whatever it was, he's excited to start negotiating with his agent or whatever. But to me, we're not going to know one way or the other until April 22nd or whatever the portal deadline is on that, frankly, unless we hear he's not coming back. If we hear he's not coming back early, then that's it. But if we don't hear anything, it's just hard to count on anything given how things happened last year with coming down to the wire. But I think the other interesting example is a guy like Jaden Pierre, who has been here for now 3 years and was a guy that Kim famously, beat in one-on-one to get out of the portal and that fun narrative and all that, whatever. He's been very up and down. I think, generally speaking, his shooting has been pretty good. And I think the feeling, at least, and I'll let you speak for yourself too, but I think the feeling for a lot of fans is he's probably playing too many minutes and maybe not exactly in the position he should be playing in those minutes. And so some of it is, and we have to, you kind of have to weigh this, like how much is it a Jaden Pierre problem and how much is it a roster construction problem / Kim problem? And can Pierre come back here and be a productive player in a different role, or maybe it's time for everybody to get a fresh start? And obviously a lot of it will be what Jaden wants to do, obviously, but Kim seems like he likes him, seems like he probably would want to try to keep him, but that changes the whole dynamic for who can be available, who should be targeted. Because I think one of the things that's happened this year with Bensley Joseph, who has been probably the best player they've gotten out of the portal, is that they have a very small backcourt, and their defense, which you mentioned, they've given up 90. Like it's just been awful, the defense, frankly, which has been the opposite of Kim English's philosophy and programs. He wants to have very good defense and then have free-flowing, a lot of three-point shooting offense. But it just hasn't played out on either end that way, partially, I think, because of the roster construction. So having two small guards, do you really want to go back to the well again and bring in maybe somebody who's talented, who's 6'2", 6'3", and now you're with 2'6", 6'2", 6'3" guys in the backcourt versus you see some of these teams in the Big East, for example, who give Providence a lot of problems. They're playing, both guys are 6'3", 6'4", 6'5", and a lot more physical. And what does that do for the ability to defend the three-point line, to stop drives? So there's just that kind of a question about whether Pierre is going to be back kind of limits our ability to project. But, still there's some good targets out there. But I want to hear your thoughts on Pierre, specifically, but also just generally with, how it's a little bit ambiguous, even only a month out here.
And like, you mentioned we have our portal committee, and it started off as a joke. I mean, it's always fun to track guys. We started doing that last year. And you'd identify a guy, one of the guys in our group identified Chaz Lanier in the beginning of January. And I had been told early on that he'd be going to Tennessee, but it just showed you that, I mean, there's a guy from North Florida, random school. They only produced one other big player, Noah Hawkla, in their history. I don't know if that's true or not. It just sounded good. But, the players are out there anywhere. And, he found that we identified players like PJ Haggerty and Anthony Dell'Osso early, that it became kind of a hobby type thing. And it gives you something else to do and feel like, you're more involved in what's going on. But as it's going on, it's made me realize what a difficult job this is, for the team. And, if you're Coach English and his staff, you're worrying about getting ready for the next game. You're worried about putting the roster together. There's the financial aspects. You got to try and keep your players here, the ones that you want, and make some hard decisions, possibly on a couple other players, while not knowing who you're going to be able to pull in on the other side. And, do you commit to a player? You mentioned Jaden, and, all indications are that Kim's going to commit to him. I mean, he's nothing but positive toward him. Has never, he kind of, I think the last press conference when somebody questioned something about Jaden, he backed away from it. defending him. So, we assume he's going to be here, but let's just say, and again, just as an example, April 10th, Jaden decides, you know what, I'd rather get closer to home, or I'd rather go get away. He has people that he's friendly with that are on the other side of the country. Maybe he wants to go out there. You never know what's going to happen. And now you're going to re-evaluate everything you've done to that point with the roster, and you're doing that on the fly. So I think the biggest thing is to make sure you have a full complement of people that are monitoring the portal, monitoring the players that you have, monitoring the finances of it all. And as for Jaden specifically, I mean, I think right now most people would agree that he and Bryce are going to be the two biggest questions, maybe Corey Floyd as well. It really does affect what they have as a team with him there. Like you said, and I go back to the St. John's game, and, we made that great comeback in the game, but it did seem like at some point, Rick Pitino just said, if Corey Floyd was guarding RJ Lewis, they went to Kadari Richmond. When he switched over to Kadari a few times, they went to RJ Lewis. And I think, you can't have that when you have both Bensley, who works very hard on defense, but he's whatever he is, 6'1". He's not the greatest defensive player. And Jaden is same size, same problems. That in the Big East especially, maybe you can get away with that in the ACC a little more, where it's more free-flowing. But the Big East, most of the teams are pretty physical, pretty aggressive. And I just think that it's a bad matchup that if you're going to go with him, you better make sure you get a big point guard to play with him. You can't have 2-6-1, 6'2" guys in the Big East. I think it's a problem. I think we even see that with Connecticut, which started the year trying to play Hassan Diarra and Aiden Mahaney together, and they were getting killed. They went to Hawaii, and if you watch the games, that's where they lost 3 games in a row, was a lot of it their guard play. And now Aiden Mahaney's been pushed so far down, he plays like 5 or 6 minutes a game, and they tried to get a little bigger to the point where they're playing Liam McNeely at the point, just to try and keep some more size on the court to get an extra bigger guy. And I think that Kim's going to have to figure out which way he's going to go with that. Is Jaden his point guard? Is he a 2 guard? Is he somebody that maybe just going to come in and play a little bit of both off the bench? You mentioned the minutes played. I mean, I talked about that since October when we did our preview. I think that most of they don't have a guy who should be playing 35 minutes a game. And I always thought the better plan would be to let Bensley and Jaden take turns at the point, play 20 minutes each at the point, and maybe 7 or 8 minutes together, and split it up that way. And it would have given more room for a Justin Fernandez or a Rich Barron to establish themselves. Maybe he felt that they couldn't handle it and he had no choice, but I think that that's been a real problem going through the year. And it's not either one of the players' fault. It's the fact that the 2 of them are together.
Yeah, and to your point, who was guarding Kadari Richmond at the end of the St. John's game when he hit that shot? Pierre.
Yeah.
And he had 5 inches on him and he could shoot it right over him. It was the same play they ran in Providence that he missed the shot and Zuby got the rebound. So, yeah, I mean, the problem with those 2 playing together is much more on the defensive end. And I think that general philosophy makes sense. I think people don't want to hear this, but like there were a lot of injuries. Barron was coming off off-season shoulder surgery. So maybe Kim really didn't feel like he had a choice, and then, maybe figuring he'll just tread water until Bryce gets back. Bryce gets back, and then he's gone again. So, it's hard to really blame the players. I don't know that they haven't given up. If anything, Bensley's playing the hardest probably of anybody at this point, and he has nothing left to play for. Really, doesn't have another year. I mean, obviously he wants to go play professional basketball, but so it's not really any fault of theirs, but it just feels like the roster construction, and to the point before about maybe they rush things in the portal. We'll see. It'll be interesting to see in a month how active Providence is out there, and if they have anybody locked up by the end of March, or if they're trying to wait a little bit. And some of that could be certain guys they like aren't in the portal right away, but I suspect there's going to be a ton of names in the portal right away, given the shorter time frame this time with 30 days. So, we can talk about. There's a couple guys from the committee list. One of them played this evening, and I think set single season record, if I'm not mistaken. Let me see if I can.
Yeah, he set the Monmouth single season record for threes, and he's actually leading the country right now. That's Abdi Bashir, who apparently his brother has just committed to, or verbally committed to Auburn for next year, his twin brother.
Yeah, this was his stat line this evening, and this is courtesy of the portal, player tracker bot that we've got in the Discord, which I think is working as of today. It sends out alerts for the guys on our watch list. So if there's about 30 or so guys on the watch list, so whenever their games finish, an alert goes to the committee channel with the player and some stats. I would say the 7 turnovers, not great to see, but 8 of 13 from 3, pretty good. 30 minutes, 30 points in a win over Northeastern. So I also have some highlights that I can figure out how to slide this over here. Playing in junior college right now. They're both, I think they're both like 6'5", 6'6", 6'7". We got a little ad here for Verizon, some free ads.
One of our newest sponsors.
This is some highlight here. Maybe we'll get a better advantage of Michigan State. So he's somebody who playing in the CAA, which is a solid league, playing for King Rice at Monmouth. This is a league that you could reasonably see somebody translating, especially somebody who he's got good size, which is an issue for one of your other favorite guys, Bud Clark at Merrimack, who does not have the size, but Bashir has the size. And one of the stats that I've been looking at a lot in the kind of as we evaluate guys and as names are thrown out there, which happens entirely too often every day, random names, especially from Tim, which he's got problems.
Yeah.
But is the there's a stat that Torvik has, the Porpagatu, which is effectively, if you looked at guys who have similar usage, it's sort of like a WAR type number for that player. Not exactly WAR, but sort of like how like other guys at that similar usage, how they compare against like replacement level players. So I like some of the better players in like guys who are maybe not like the elite stars, but are very good players in the Big East are. I've been sort of looking at a minimum of having a 4 or above, and his is currently only 2.4. But I think he's such a specialty type guy with the shooting. I mean, he's got a pretty high usage, 32% almost, and his offensive rating is only 100, probably because he does have a little bit of a higher turnover number at 16%, which is not crazy, but somebody who I think he's now. This was last week. I'm looking at stats of him from last week, and he was 100 for 257. He's got a 3-point attempt per 100 possessions of almost 17, which is insane. So I mean, this is somebody who, realistically, would be a great fit for any team, and especially teams who like to shoot and space the floor. So as we're seeing a lot of shots here, this is one of your guys. So I'll let you talk more about him.
It's funny if you watch him, and I think part of the reason that his offensive numbers probably aren't as great, his rating and stuff, is because of the team he's on. He's kind of forced into taking a lot of tough threes. Kim always talks about forcing guys into tough twos. He's taking tough threes. At the end of the shot clock, they just give him the ball and hope he throws up something. So, he's shooting just, I believe, a speck under 40% from 3, but he's probably taken more difficult threes than any player in the country. And, the opponents also know what he's doing. They know that, he's going to be shooting constantly. He tries to work the ball around a little, but it's not an easy thing when you're on a team that's not overly talented. They're struggling in the conference. Um, the other thing that scares me about him, though, is he's so thin. I think he's 6'7", like 180. He's got the height, but he's. You wonder if he would hold up in the Big East, but he is a guard, so maybe it's a little bit easier. And like I said, his twin brother just committed to Auburn, so there's clearly some talent there. His twin brother was playing in junior college in Wyoming. And John Fanta told the story during the game today against Northeastern that he had no offers. He was working out with somebody, and they asked him where he was going to school, and he said that he's looking to hook on with a JUCO or a Division II school. And I'm trying to remember who the guy was I think the former coach at George Washington. And he said, hold on a minute. And he got King Rice on the phone, and he put him on a FaceTime, and he said, you need to trust me. You need to get this guy in here. And King offered him a scholarship on FaceTime. And that's how he ended up there. And he's averaging 20 points a game. And like I said, he's got 108 or 9 3-pointers right now for the year. So it was a good pickup, and it just shows you sometimes you can find guys anywhere. So he's the kind of guy that if we could get, I'd sign him today. I don't know that what his NIL will be, but that's what we need more guys for, to put all that together.
Yeah, and on that topic, probably a good segue to talk a little bit more big picture. We'll talk about some other guys in a little while, but something that I and this is I said this recently, and I think other people kind of agreed with me, and I don't know what it is. There's just something about listening to Curry Hicks Sage's search season Twitter spaces that I can't stop listening to them. I don't know what. Yeah, I mean the eating is an endearing part of it. It's just like mesmerizing. He just talks and then brings people on. It's just so interesting, but mundane and niche, and like I don't know. I can't stop listening to it. But it got me thinking, and this is something that it's almost like when I my day job, if I go to like I listen to a webinar and maybe the topic isn't exactly applicable, but I think of something applicable to what I'm doing. It's sort of how I look at it, listening to his spaces. Like he'll say things, and it's not he's talking about like Georgia Southern or something, and like a very niche whatever, and it has nothing to do with Providence, but it makes me think a lot about Providence and how some of this stuff really has to change. And I mentioned kind of earlier that one of the interesting things that's kind of hanging over this spring portal season is the house settlement is supposed to happen in April, which is supposed to trigger a bunch of things, one of which is NIL would drastically change / go away in the way it's being done now, where it's largely handled by third-party collectives, which are not part of athletic departments and are not affiliated with schools directly, though some of them are recognized by schools. Like Providence, the Friar Family Collective is recognized by the school. They have some licensing ability to use logos, which is not the case at every school. So there is some connection, but that sort of thing is apparently going to change once this house settlement comes in, although nobody knows whether it's going to happen, if it does happen, if the judge is going to accept the terms of it and allow the proposed settlement to go forward and then be put in practice, which the gist of it is that colleges then will have the ability to do direct revenue sharing with the players, so that you don't have to sign these deals with like the local car dealership and hope that they'll give money and cars to kids for their marketing ability and have nothing absolute to do with their on-court performance, because that would be wrong and illegal, of course. But now you can say, and the numbers that have been reported are around $22 million. Every athletic department will be allocated a maximum, basically like a salary cap for the entire athletic department. So one of the things that is looked at in that world as a potential advantage for a school like Providence and generally the Big East schools who don't have football, particularly everybody except UConn, is that they'll be able to have the ability to, maybe if they, assuming they have the funds, but they'll have the flexibility to potentially allocate more money towards their men's basketball programs than some schools like Auburn, for example, that you were talking about, who are going to have to spend a lot of their $22 million on their football players, and Providence not having football, the ability to maybe spend north of $3, $4, $5 million of the 22 million, and then the other 17 million or 18, 19 million goes to all downstream, kind of flows down to the other programs as makes sense to fund and do things. But to have the ability to spend that money directly on players, and then you could still do NIL on the top, and the collectives could still exist in theory, although it seems like a lot of schools are thinking about maybe bringing in-house that marketing angle of the collectives, so that they're going to become, it's all going to be kind of hand in glove and connected, because there's also parts of the settlement that are trying to sort of regulate the NIL space a little bit more, so that things have to be approved by the schools, and there's all this. None of this is set in stone. Even when it appears to be set in stone in April, it's just as good until the next lawsuit happens. So it's really hard to plan. And I feel bad for some of these ADs and coaches who are trying to figure this all out and what's best for their schools, trying to plan and raise money, but then also have no idea whether any of this is going to be relevant in 6 weeks or not. But so that's sort of the backdrop of this portal season, is that this house settlement is going to happen like 3 weeks after the portal opens. So it'll be interesting to see how much movement happens right away, especially for maybe the bigger ticket guys who are maybe can tend to be more patient. And then obviously this now is all misaligned with the NBA draft process, because that goes into May with the combine. So there's just a lot of stuff. But I think to get back to sort of how I started here with this is a classic Curry Hicks H just ramble. I just rambled about all sorts of things, not about the point. But I'm coming back now to the point, which is, I think the future of very high major college basketball, if you want to be in that upper echelon of high major basketball and compete, it's no longer the case that you have to the latest thing, like when you think back to like the last generation of coaching hire, like when they hired Ed Cooley, one of the big things that Cooley had negotiated with Bob Driscoll when he got hired was that the college, and this is something he got a promise from Father Shanley on, is that the college would commit to building a practice facility, because they were really, I think, one of two, or maybe the only one by then, of the Big East schools who didn't have like a state-of-the-art, pretty recently done practice facility. They were still practicing in the Alumni Hall, and they didn't have a dedicated facility. They're sharing it with women's basketball and women's volleyball, and they had some injury issues, and there was an air conditioning problem. So there's, this is the problems of 15 years ago, where they're trying to. That was the scene as like the jewel for recruiting. Like, oh, you got look at this facility. Oh my God, the facility is going to recruit itself. And now, obviously, in the new world, everyone has these facilities. So the next thing, I think, that everyone's going to want to have, and particularly coaches, I think, as they're moving jobs and have the leverage to ask and make commitments, get commitments from schools, is that they want to have a general manager, and they want to have almost like a front office, NBA front office of with scouting and analytics. So you think of like right now, Providence has Kevin Kerbeck is in a role where he's sort of like I don't know that he's technically, I don't know what his actual title is, but I think he's probably more like an administrator of the men's and women's basketball than he is like a general manager, in the sense that I'm thinking about, like where like Tim Fuller is probably right now the GM for Providence College, and he's an assistant coach. And maybe there's advantages, we've talked about this, maybe there's advantages to that, because the current rules are set up in which he wouldn't be able to be on the road recruiting if he was not an assistant. So maybe that's a way that they're kind of working around it for now. But it feels like you have to have the ability, like you were saying, like we do this committee that it's kind of, it really did start as like, let's just start throwing stuff out. We're doing evaluations. We're looking at stats, trying to like quickly see without watching guys on film, who kind of makes sense or doesn't make sense. And then maybe we dig in a little deeper if they made sense. Like we're just doing this for fun, but like these guys all have to coach, prep for games, watch film for their games, do like all kinds of relationship stuff to keep their current guys happy. There's just so much that has to happen. And it feels impossible to expect these guys to have the ability to, in a span of 30 days now, and like, so let's say Providence's season ends on around March 20th, whatever the dates are. I don't know if that's like Selection Sunday or after the Big East tournament. They have like a week, 5 days, where they have to cram in a bunch of film on guys they think are going to be in the portal that they'd like. And then you do, like, there's just like, it's impossible to do it after the fact. Like, this is something that has to be happening all season long. There has to be a list of guys that would be like, regardless of their status, like, obviously we're not going to know everyone in the portal, not in the portal. You have to have a list of guys who you would target if they were to go in the portal. These are like the 20 guys we love, and these are the next 10 guys that if those guys don't go in the portal, we like a lot. And you have to kind of tier it, and you can keep the analytics up all season long, kind of like we do, but we're obviously just people in the Discord. We're not professional like scout analytics people who would have the ability to travel and watch games, watch film of every person's game, do detailed reporting, shot quality analysis, all sorts of tools and resources, and then give like weekly reports to Kim and the assistants and say, we're tracking these 10 guys. Here's how they did last week. We've moved a couple guys off the list. We moved a couple guys on the list. We heard from this guy's coach that he's probably going to go on the portal. Like, that sort of stuff has to be happening all year long. And there needs to be dedicated staff to do that. And I think that a lot of staffs maybe trying to do this now with some of their, like, maybe there's some of their grad assistants, or maybe one or two assistant coaches is doing some of this like in their off days or whatever. But they have to professionalizing the front office GM role, and scouting and analytics has to be a big focus, I think, of like resource allocation, especially if the schools are going to be paying revenue sharing directly. That it just is incumbent on, athletic directors and presidents of schools to realize this, and like, this is the new practice facility. And if you're looking to raise money for things, raise money so you can hire a really competent, well-connected basketball person to be a GM, and have them bring in a few like 20-something, 30-something guys who are analytics nerds, or buy a software or whatever, but figure out how to do that, because that's the next level. That's like where this is going to be. Like, it's unfair to expect these coaches probably to do all they're doing. They have no off seasons now because they go from the portal to immediately in April starts the AAU season. EYBL is in April. There's all these so there's just no breaks. There's no stopping. There's no ability to take some time, build relationships. They have 30 days to get it all done now. It's crazy.
It is, and it's funny. I'm finding now more and more that the steps in college basketball tend to be a little bit behind college football, probably because of the money difference being so much. For people who don't know, I'm a big Oklahoma football fan, and it's not just them, because pretty much the entire SEC and Big Ten, I'm sure, have the same setups, but they have a support staff that the entire, they work under their general manager for football, who do portal, and it's for freshmen, sophomores, and juniors. Each class has one for offense and for defense that's in charge of it. And they're basically watching film. They know what, the coaching staff is telling them what we're looking for. We need, whether it's left tackles or whatever, wide receivers, we need runners, whatever. And that they track that every week. Every guy who's possible that they think there's any chance they could come out there. And they do, like you said, it's when you were saying it, you talked about Curry Hicks. That's what I started picturing here, that they do that for each class. And then they have fundraising people to make sure that they have the NIL to compete with them, the Alabamas, and, they're one of the ones that other schools are competing with. And when we started looking at this from Providence, not to be rude, and I hope this doesn't come out that way, but you can't have somebody who's doing basketball for the men and basketball for the women. The basketball program, the men's program, needs their own staff, and I'm sure the women's do too. Maybe with some of the non-revenue sports, there can be some combinations, but it's too much now. And, like you mentioned about the AAU and the high school and the prep seasons and everything else. That's a full-time job, is trying to manage all of this. And then it's another full-time job trying to manage the college kids. the portal. For people who don't know, Trilly Donovan with his Discord, they put guys out there regularly that are in the portal, that are expected to go in the portal. I mean, I think last year it was 2,000 kids roughly in the portal. So 350 teams, that's 6 players per team on average. And a lot of schools like, DePaul in the Big East has 13 new guys. There's no way you can keep tracking this, track the money. Like you said, is it going to be in-house through revenue sharing where people are able to make tax deductible donations to the school? Is it going to be separate? Is it going to be a combination? I do know that there was one conference that's already filed an opposition with the court on the proposed settlement. So I don't know if that'll delay it or they'll just say, too bad, live with it. And again, what's going to happen in a few years with, are the football programs going to try and separate themselves just for football, for all sports, whatever? There's no way that, in my opinion, that the old school ways of being able to put a team together, and even you see it now, like schools like North Carolina, John Calipari went to Arkansas, they're struggling. They've got the money, it's just they don't have the organization, and it's becoming a lot harder. Rick Pitino was very blunt, but also, I mean, I'll say it every time I talk about him, he's the best coach that I've ever seen in college basketball. And one of the things that made him so good was his ability to adapt to everything. Usually he adapted before anyone else did, going back to when he was at Providence with the 3-point shot. And I think he saw when he came back to St. John's how he was going to build the team, and it wasn't going to be worrying about building up a high school kids. It's if I can get a really good high school player, I'll grab him to fill a slot as long as he understands it's going to be, pretty much wait your turn and build in the program. But otherwise, we're going to go out and we're going to grab and recruit the top players that are available in the portal because I don't want to wait to win. People talked about Marquette, about how they were able to build their own program and they didn't reach into the portal. But once again, this year, they're starting to struggle till the end of the year because they probably could have used a couple of portal guys right about now. A guy like Benzie Joseph type, and I'm just mentioning him because he's from Providence, or Wesley Cadet, would have fit in nicely with their team and could have blended with some of their other guys. Building from scratch and staying within and not reaching out to the portal sounds good until it comes time that you need those guys come March rather.
This is what happens when you try to tweet and
I'm sure it was a good
do
tweet.
A live show. Yeah, I think, and to Patino's point about, I think he said something the other night about, you can't really win at the high level freshmen. It's, it feels like a strength for Kim English is recruiting high level freshmen. He's recruited the freshmen at a much higher level so far in his first 2 seasons than we've been used to, certainly in the last 20 years. Maybe not since Rick Barnes, really. So it's going to be an interesting balance because, like, even you see a guy like Ryan Mila, who obviously had a back issue in the from the end of his high school season that carried through the summer and was limited to. He didn't start practicing until I think it was just around closer to Halloween before the exhibition against UMass. So that has to be a factor, I guess. But somebody like him who was unable to sort of break through and get minutes until Bryce Hopkins was out, and he really didn't do much the first 3-4 weeks of the season. And then he went through a little bit of a nice run, and then he got to be higher up on the scouting report, and teams adjusted, realized he couldn't shoot, and backed off him, and it limited his ability to drive. And he still was doing a lot of good things, making we have the Mela making things happen, but and defensive rebounding has been very good. But he wasn't especially highly rated, and Kim's got a couple guys that are very highly rated coming in next year. Obviously, Austin was highly rated, but another guy who was injured last year during his high school season and was slow to come back, came in late to Providence because he technically was a member of the class of 2024. 5, and then eventually in
Went back.
July came
Yeah.
back, which everyone knew was going to happen. But he kept getting experience. He went to the NBA PA top 100 camp and some other things. So he was late arriving. So it's hard to judge. But the freshmen have been able to be impact players so far at Providence this past year, and one highly rated and one not as highly rated. And then you got Jameer Jones coming in, who is like a top 40, top 50, like ridiculous athlete, highlight reel dunk guy. Who it'd be interesting to see how that kind of plays next year. He's not much of a shooter. What his role will be next year, and then Jalen Harrell, who is a little more of has like a little more of a well-rounded game, probably can score a little bit from all three levels. He's got pretty good size. He's been putting up some big numbers this year and recently. I think he had a 35-point game the other night. And the other thing I think most Friar fans really like about him is he's very all in on being a Friar. He's very in the mix on social media. Very supportive of the team, even as things have not been great this year. Obviously, been to some games and tweets all the time about the team. So that's always, I think, a nice thing for fans to see. But we can maybe I'll talk about another portal guy we love in a second. But just one high school guy that also I think you really like is Sebastian Wilkins, and it's like where do you if let's say he's ready to come back from 26 to 25 and go to college next year, he's a top 30-ish recruit in the class of 2026 right now at Brewster Academy. Are we in a world where you take 3 freshmen next year who are going to be very limited probably in their ability to contribute? At least you would expect that Kim is going to be trying to really make the tournament next year after missing the first 2 years, and maybe a lot of pressure on at least being on the bubble, for God's sakes. So I don't know how to weigh the future now. I think the ideal would be to have 1 or 2 like really good freshmen that stay and you build around for 2 or 3 years, and maybe they stay for a 4th year if they could maybe make more money, if they're not going to be like a surefire first round type guy, and they can make more money in college through revenue sharing or NIL or whatever. Or do you try to go all in on the portal next year? You have your 2 guys that you're bringing in already, but you just sort of recruit over them for a year because you need to win. I don't know what the right balance is, but that's something that Kim's going to probably have to find out the hard way or the easy way. We'll find out, next year. But
well, and that's another good example of, you talked, like I said, about having a general manager to organize everything, because when you're recruiting, a high level player, like especially Jameer Jones, I think is top 40-ish, he's probably looking for some, he has some expectations about what he's going to be able to get for playing time and everything next year, and it's easy for people to just say, hey, if you earn it, you'll get it. But when you're paying these kids, being offered a good amount of money in NIL, they want to know. And, that answer probably isn't going to work with a lot of kids. To me, if I could get somebody like Sebastian Wilkins, top 30 player, you take him and you figure out where he's going to fit. I mean, if people have seen him, he's got the body, similar to Jameer Jones. I mean, they're college ready physically. Unlike, a lot of times you see these kids that, need to fill out, need to do whatever. I think Jones is, he is what he's going to be. Sebastian Wilkins, if you look at him, it's hard to believe he's 17 years old. He's just got the frame, everything, that he's ready to play in college now. So in general, I'd be leery of taking a 3rd player unless it's somebody at that level. That's my opinion. And the other thing I had is, you mentioned the guys we have. One of the things that they also have to figure out is, if we assume that Osman will be here next year, who are you bringing in to complement him? He's shown a little bit of trouble staying on the floor with fouls and everything. I suspect with a year experience, and maybe he gets better whistles as a returning player next year, that solves part of the problem. But, he's probably playing 25 to 28 minutes a game on average. You still need a quality center to play the rest of the time with him. Who would that be? And so I think that there's just so much that goes into all of this to put a team together that it's much more complicated now. But as far as freshmen themselves, like I said, if you can get somebody who can shoot at an elite level that doesn't have the pressure that they have to do it, I think you take it. And if he's better than you expect, even more. But I wouldn't take a top 100 like player, top 30 or 40 player, maybe. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Some highlights there that we were just watching are Jalen Harrell, and the one before was a new highlight that Jameer Jones just tweeted out like an hour and a half ago or an hour plus ago. So we'll talk maybe one more portal guy, and then we'll get out of here. I think I've gone back and forth a little bit on this guy, and it's another one that I think like a guy like Bashir is a guy you take no matter, like, he's not impacted by the decisions that happen with Bryce Hopkins and with Pierre. He's just he's like a ticket Jabri tall shooter role, so he could probably more likely the three than Ticket. With the Ticket could play more of the four because he said he is pretty thin and he doesn't really rebound, but that's sort of a separate case. He's just a shooter. You take him no matter what. But the point guard conversation's complicated because of Pierre, because you don't know if you really can add another small guard or if you should be targeting certain guys that you might like if he were not here. But if he is here, then how do you complement him and try to give him the best chance to succeed? But on the other guy that we have, that is another favorite of yours that I've kind of come around on, it took me a little while, is Reed Bailey from Davidson, a guy that Providence saw up close and personal, which has been a bit of a theme. They usually get a guy out of the portal, at least one guy that they played against the year before. They had Jabri, who they played when they played Georgia last year. It's a guy who I think probably fits no matter what, but I think fits a lot better if Bryce Hopkins is not back. And obviously we haven't really talked about this, but just because Oswin's here and he's having a pretty good freshman year, there's no guarantees he stays. I mean, big guys command probably the most money in the portal. So, if somebody really wants him, and they make some wild offer, there's every chance that he's not back. I mean, this is the reality. You can't really assume anybody's back anymore, I don't think. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
No, I agree completely. I mean, personally, when the season ends, the first person I would make sure that I've got back on track would be Oswin. I think he's the guy that sets the tone, and I think it would be a disaster for this program to lose, the best freshman we've had in ages coming into the program. But in terms of Reed Bailey, I actually went down to the URI Davidson game as well, just because Friars weren't playing that day and I wanted to see him in person. And I couldn't help but think that both him and the other player on their team, Bobby Durkin, would fit in immediately. Bailey, I could see him playing very easily with Oswin on the floor because he's got a little bit of a range, a little bit of Noah Hawkless skills in him, except he's a better ball handler and he can also post up players. So, I mean, he could fit it out. The problem, like you said, is if he and Oswin and Bryce Hopkins are all there, not only are you talking probably the majority of your NIL allotment under the current system, you kind of clogging everything together unless Bryce shows that he could move to the three, which I think is a very big gamble at this point in his career, coming back from the injuries. But it was actually Matt Bolton in our group who pointed out Reed Bailey originally. And my thought was I'd rather get guys for multiple years. I was trying to look at freshmen and sophomores in the portal. Bailey is a junior, but, his skill set fits. Like I said, I think if Oswin wasn't here, he could play the 5 with Bryce and he'd be, somewhere between Josh Odoro and Noah Hawkler. And if Bryce wasn't here, he could fit with Oswin. I think fitting the 3 of them together might be a bit difficult and it might hamstring your ability to offer some other players. The other guy there, I mentioned before, was Bobby Durkin, who's a sophomore guard who's 6'7", but he's also a good rebounder. He's basically looks like Ryan Miller if Ryan Miller was a 45% shooter from three and an 85% shooter from the foul line. Just good skills, does a little bit of everything, and shoots the light out. So my personal preference would be to get a player like him first and foremost, because he fits in any way you do it. If you want to put him at the 2 guard or the 3, he can do a little bit of everything and shoot. I love Reed Bailey's game, and I'd like to have him on the team, except it could be a problem, like I said, more the money than anything, that you're kind of allocating your 3 biggest dollar commitments in NIL to guys who play 2 positions.
Yeah, this is some of the uncertainty that we just won't know for maybe 2 months, because it's possible that some of this stuff we won't know until the very last of the deadline. So, I think it's been an interesting show. I hope that people enjoyed some of this portal talk. We're going to do more of it, obviously, because it's sort of all we have left in some ways. 4 games to go in Milwaukee tomorrow night. That one is on what do we got? It's so they got Milwaukee tomorrow night, and it's on FS1 at 7 p.m. Eastern. And then Saturday is UConn, which I think is a noon tip.
12 noon start.
Yeah, so that's at home. Then they have DePaul at home, and then they finish at Xavier. So that's sort of the next 2 weeks or so.
And just so you know, the UConn game is on CBS Saturday.
That's right.
And it is senior night.
Right, that's right, because
Even
they're
though
not
they have another home game.
Because DePaul is during the week. Yeah, and spring break, right?
Right.
The kids have spring break. So yeah, so we there's some game left, and we'll see how things are impossible to know game to game which team is going to show up, both like physically, like which players are going to be healthy and playing, and also is it going to be the team that looks ridiculously good against Villanova, or is it going to be the team that looks ridiculously bad at Georgetown? So we shall find out. Marquette has not been great since January 1st, like we talked about before the show. The Providence is 5-8, which is not great either, but Marquette's just 8-5 since then. So obviously really hard to win on the road, really hard to win in Milwaukee. They're not the top of the league like maybe it was thought of that they would be before the calendar turned to 2025, but they're still very good, and they still shellacked this team in Providence. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. And then I'm just looking forward to the Big East tournament because it's always a fun time. I'm going to be traveling a little bit, unfortunately, earlier in that week, so I probably won't be at the Wednesday game. I get home from Florida Wednesday night, probably. So if they can win Wednesday night, I'd like to go on Thursday, which would be nice. But if we can get through the next few weeks, get the portal season, and then hope springs eternal, and everyone will start talking themselves into the tournament next year. So thanks for joining us. We will hopefully be back next week, all 3 of us. Brendan, I think, just got back from a work trip like 30 minutes ago. So we'll hopefully have a little more on some of the games and a little more fleshed out on some more portal names to talk about. And if you're interested in joining us to talk about this between now and then, we urge you to join the Discord. It's there are free and paid options. The free option, we've had some new guys in. It just for some reason just hasn't. There's not as much conversation on the free side, but there is a free side. And if people come in and start talking, I will talk in there. So, but yeah, the portal. The other thing that is interesting now about the Discord is that thanks to AI, I'm a coder, and I've built a bunch of bots, including that portal tracker bot that you saw, which has post stats of guys into the portal committee channel. The other one I think is good is we have a bot for the where you can to look up player stats. You can both look up individual players like Reed Bailey. You can see a lot of his stats from Ken Pom and Torvik, and then you can also compare 2 players. So if you wanted to look at Reed Bailey versus another guy like Christoph Tilley was a guy that I always use because they're similar positions from Santa Clara. You can see like, oh, this guy is a better rebounder, and this guy is a better 3-point shooter. This guy has a little more ability to pass the ball. He's got a higher assist rate. Like some of that stuff is interesting. So that's another bot we have. Also, the close game alerts bot, which is the one that I built that has worked the best. I have had to touch that very little. Is going right now. We've got a lot of close games in college basketball tonight again. So if you're interested in that, pcbb1917.com/discord, and you can join us there. And we will see you hopefully next week.